Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm really excited to have another guest on the show today. We have Lynne Stainthorpe joining us, and it's brilliant to have her on because I have known Lynne for absolutely years. Originally met each other, I think, through networking many, many years ago. And Lynne is an amazing voice when it comes to brand strategy. And I know that I've been asked many questions recently about building personal brand. It's something I like to talk about. It's something clients and other people are asking me about at the moment. So I wanted to invite Lynne on to talk to us today all about this idea about building your own personal brand. So to start off, Lynne, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on. It's really nice to see you today.
Thank you for inviting me. And this topic is really fascinating. And I think it's fascinating for everybody because back in the day, personal branding, when it first emerged, I think you could take it back to when Tom Peters wrote an article about the brand called You. And then I think he did a book about it, and it was back in the late 90s. And the idea was the brand called You was for people working in organizations, and that it was part of taking ownership of your own career and how you positioned yourself and how you promoted yourself internally to achieve your goals and aims. I think what's happened since then is with with a huge expansion in social media, we've all got a personal brand. And indeed, people talk about building a business using their personal brand. Although I have a view that at some stage, if your name is on the door of your business, at some stage you will evolve from using your personal brand into your name has become a business brand. But that's another that's another topic. So here we're talking about personal brand.
I love that. And I didn't actually realize the concept of it been around for so long. That's really interesting to
Mm,
me. And I
mm,
can imagine that some people listening to this, some of these concepts and ideas might be quite new. So let's start with positioning. So you talked
mm,
about positioning and promotion. So let's start with
mm,
positioning ourselves.
mm.
What do
Yeah.
you mean by that? And how do we apply branding principles to positioning ourselves within an organization, for example?
Yeah. So, what's really similar for me with if you're thinking about the impact you want to make within an organization, what's really similar for me with thinking about your personal brand and thinking about your business brand is it kind of starts in the same place, which is from the inside out. So there's a wonderful quote from PricewaterhouseCoopers who say, personal branding is about bringing who you are to what you do and how you do it. And I think that's a wonderful summary of it. So if you're going to be, and this also applies to individuals and to businesses, if you're clear and if you're consistent in how you make an impact, how you talk, how you look, over time, you will be remembered. And you'll be remembered for something. And what you want to do when you're thinking about your personal brand is be very clear about what you want to be known for.
Mm.
And that's a big part of the who. So what it then comes back to is thinking about, well, what's my vision for me?
Mm.
And it could be that the vision for me might not be achieved in the current organization. It might be something that will be achieved by working through different organizations. So that's thinking about what's your vision for me is a really good start point.
And
And
can I
then,
just jump in
yeah,
there, Lynne, actually, because
yeah,
I
yeah,
like that idea of the vision of me. And
yeah.
I suppose when you think about it from a branding perspective, what's the
Yeah,
sort of timeline or time frame we should be thinking about? Because
yeah,
clearly, I can imagine some people who listen to this might be thinking, well, should I be thinking, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or is it really macro? Like, is this what I want to achieve in my lifetime? Or is it
yeah,
all of it? I don't know. I'm quite curious how you consider
yeah.
that.
So when I'm working with businesses, then we talk about 3 to 5 years.
Mm,
If you're talking about an individual, you could use that time frame, and you could also think about, what's my legacy? What do you could think about, as you say, is this a lifetime? So it's what feels most comfortable for someone to be thinking about. If you want to say, right, in the next 5 years, and if you want to say, right, in the next 10 years, I think choose the time scale that is relatable for you. And of course, what then comes into play is you've got these jargon words, like you've got purpose as well, vision and purpose. And with purpose, what also comes into play is what do you feel passionate about? And then passions and purpose are related to what are my values. And I think when you work in an organization, one of the things to check out, I think, before you join is, what are the values of this organization?
mm.
Because if there's a misalignment between your personal values and the values of the organization, something's not going to work.
Yeah, and I think that's
So,
probably more important than ever, right? Because I think
yeah,
in our sort of post-COVID world, people are much more discerning about, am I right working for the right type of
yeah,
organization here? Does this
yeah,
align with who I am?
yeah,
I just back up to something you said about vision and purpose, because I'm
yeah,
obviously very familiar with those words from my own
yeah,
time in marketing in my first
yeah,
career. But I
yeah,
know for a lot of people, these words sometimes end up being a bit interchangeable and a little
yeah,
bit sort of mixed up. So
yeah,
could you just define really what you mean by vision and versus purpose, just that people have
yeah.
that clear?
Yeah, the way I think about it is I use literal words. So for me, the vision is, where am I heading?
Mhm.
The purpose is about, why does this matter for me? And it's the kind of guiding principle, isn't it? A why. So why does this matter for me? Why is it important? Why would it matter for others? So I use why for purpose. So why
Mhm.
this matters. And it can matter just for you, or it can matter for a lot of other people. But the thing is, it's something that is emotional, and it has an inner drive, I think, an inner driving force. And values for me are the how of how you operate. And values, I also think of as your personal moral compass, or the business's moral compass. And the reason they're important for an individual and for a business is that they determine, and this is really important for a personal brand, how this person behaves. And behavior then has an impact on others. So behavior will impact on your bosses, their bosses, it impacts on your colleagues, it impacts on people in your team, people in other teams that you interact with, and it impacts on people that you might be responsible for.
Mm.
So behavior for me is determined by your values, the moral compass that you operate within, and this is just, it's just so important for your personal brand.
Yeah, and I love that simplistic explanation. Even just saying it's the what with your vision, it's the why with the purpose, and it's the how with your values.
Yeah,
I mean, interestingly, you mentioned with purpose, and I'll come back to values in a minute, but on purpose, you talked about the fact that it can be about purpose because it's about you or your
yeah,
immediate, say, family, or
yeah,
it could be the world, like the purpose. And I
Yeah,
like that
yeah,
idea because, sometimes I think people feel like they've got to have a big purpose with a
yeah,
capital P, and it's
yeah,
got to be like
yeah,
world changing. And
yeah,
clearly, there are so many people who do have this, which is
yeah,
incredibly inspiring and
yeah,
incredibly motivating. And yet, not everybody has that. Would you
yeah.
agree?
Yeah, I do. I do. I do. And I think it's about, some people say, well, what am I here to do in this lifetime? And that's definitely a contributing factor. And it could be because the other thing that I think is really important about your personal brand is it has to evolve.
Mhm.
So, so we need to be clear. We need to be consistent, yet we are not stuck in this clarification or definition of who we are this moment, because who you are will be influenced by what's going on in the world, by what's going on in the business, by what's happening within you, what personal developments you're going through. So we manage, and I think as humans, we're capable of doing this. We're managing, maybe this is the way to think about it, being consistent to our values and to why we want to do what we want to do, whilst at the same time evolving, how we talk, evolving how we look, evolving how we might even evolve up some of our values, like bring in new values. If you think about 20 years ago, how many people would have had a value around nature or the environment, but now that's a value around nature, the environment, caring for others is likely to figure much more than it would have done 20, 30 years ago.
I really like that idea of evolution because, of
Yeah,
course, we evolve as people. I
yeah,
think about who I
mhm,
was even
yeah,
20 years ago. I'm a really
yeah,
different person now. And I
yeah,
really like that idea because, if I think related to my world and cultural intelligence, I often help people understand their behavioral preferences
yeah,
within cultural values and
yeah,
how they show up and how
yeah,
they prefer to communicate, prefer to interact
yeah,
and behave. And that can evolve actually because we're shaped by our cultural experiences, who
yeah,
we work with, where we live,
yeah,
where we relocate to, or
yeah,
basically by working in very global international
yeah,
environments. So I'm glad we're sort of like talking the
yeah,
same sort of way.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm really interested in a concept which is businesses can rebrand.
yes,
Sometimes businesses decide, right, we've had a shift in our positioning. So we're coming out with a brand new look, a brand new way of communicating, and we're going to be really signaling externally we're new or we're moving on. Does that also happen in personal brand? Can we rebrand ourselves in this way?
yeah. We can all do it. I mean, a simple way to think about it is you have a makeover.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Because and I think when I talk about brand personality for business brands, I say that it's got three aspects. So there's how the brand behaves, which of course is linked, well, it's not linked, it's aligned fully with values and purpose. And then there's how the brand looks, and there's how the brand speaks and listens. So what can happen is you can rebrand yourself. I mean, you probably can think of instances where, um, like someone's learned something, they've learned something new and it's changed their perspectives. And that's a learning that drives something inside that said, right, this is manifested. I'm going to change how I behave in this way. So that's a change in behavior. And as I said before, you can change your look. And I think for personal branding, you can't get away from this. Um, how how you look what your style is, the image that you cultivate, maybe the colors that you wear which complement you, the styles you wear. What they're doing is they're adding up to an appearance and a perception of you and the impact you want to make. So if you pay no attention at all to how you dress and how you look, how is that going to be perceived? If you always turn up looking smart, looking like you've coordinated yourself, you coordinated your colors or your jewelry, or your tie goes with your shirt, or you always wear brightly colored socks, if you're a guy. So these are elements that get you noticed. And that's what personal branding is about. It's about your reputation, which links to behavior. It's about your image. It's about how you stand out. So if you want to get promoted, if you want to get a new job, then these are things to think about. Think about, well, what are my strengths? What does drive me? How do I look? And then the third element is, how does this person, this is your area, how does this person speak? What sort of words do they use? Are they sweary? Are they always saying da 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 da, but? Because there's a way to put the pros and cons without being a but person, which you can help with. You can say and or yet, because but is quite negative. So it's a little detail, but it shows about how you speak. And the other part that I think is really so important about how the personal brand is speaking is, how well do they listen? Listening is such a big part of your communication. And I'll give an example of it. I was recently on a course, and there was someone on the course who constantly spoke over everyone else. So, and what other people then said about that person was, they don't listen.
Wow, that's a really powerful example. And there's just so much depth in what you just shared there.
Yeah,
Yes, I mean, in my world, I tend to focus on communication through how we speak,
yeah,
um, how we listen as well, actually, because you're
yeah,
absolutely right. Communication is a two-way process in
yeah,
that way. But interestingly, I love the visual side of this. And actually, this is very fascinating to me because you can obviously choose to go with the majority or go with what you believe you want to position yourself as in that look
yeah.
and feel, or you can disrupt it, right? You can do something
Yes,
completely different. I
yes,
mean, I was thinking of an example recently where I met somebody who he was wearing a bow tie and that was
yeah,
his thing, which is
yeah,
slightly old fashioned, slightly
yeah,
different, slightly quirky, unique,
yeah,
but it was very him,
yeah,
very memorable.
yeah.
And equally, the look and what we wear evolves over time as well, because also trends change as
Oh,
well.
absolutely.
Um, so I love that kind of idea of the 360, thinking about your personal brand, how you look, how you speak, how people experience you. And I love the fact you brought in listening there as well,
Mm,
because
mm,
actually, why is it you think that we don't spend enough time talking about listening? Because this is really interesting to me that
yeah,
when people come to talk to me, it's often about the speaking. How do I speak
mm,
better? How do I
mm,
speak more clearly? But
yeah.
why do you think we don't pay as much attention to our listening or put as much value on the listening?
Do you think it's because of social media, because of the rise of sound bites, because there's an I mean, we live in a visual age, don't we? So is it to do with so we speak, we get our message across, and that's a one-way process, isn't it?
Mm,
Whereas I think listening, the ability to well, there's a lot of advice about how to listen well too, which I've done posts about previously, sort of how do you demonstrate that you're listening well? Um, not interrupting, showing that you've understood what someone's saying by repeating back to them what you think you've heard. They're also you'll be an expert in this. And there's also body language. Someone
Yeah.
can be talking and you might have your arms folded and you might be looking into the distance. So it's
Mm,
it's it's the listening, it's the listening with intent, it's the listening with your body. There's just so many aspects to it. And I think it's important because people hate not feeling heard. If you're a team leader and you want to inspire your team to achieve their targets or to work together better, then if there's a feeling that the communication is one way, that becomes talking at people, not talking with people. And if there's feedback from the team and they feel they're not listened to, then that's going to have a demotivating effect. So I would encourage people when they're thinking about their personal brand to think about speaking and listening, look and style, and behavior. And of course, the speaking and listening and the style actually comes from the who of who you are.
mm,
And that then relates to how can I make a contribution to this business?
mm,
Because I always think about working in an organization it's a two-way contract. There's what the organization can do for me, and there's what I can do for the organization.
mm. I love that. I think that's really very insightful because actually that two-way process is what makes it work. And I think it comes back to our conversation about values that you need
Yeah,
to feel like you're aligned, that you're
yeah,
working towards the same
yeah,
principles and the same points
yeah,
as well.
yeah, definitely.
Building on that, I have an interesting question, which is about I occasionally have people who say, well, look, I see perhaps people who are two or three levels ahead of me.
Mm,
They've made it, they are doing well. I should model myself on what they're doing in terms of speaking style, in terms of
mhm,
the way they do things. They're clearly successful, so maybe I should be learning from them and using some of their techniques, some of their style in what I do. Where is that balance between the big words authentic, being authentic
yeah,
to you,
yeah,
but also learning from others and incorporating, some of the best practices, I suppose, because that's an interesting one. Like when I think about that in the world of brands, you
yeah,
sometimes get brands that copy other brands,
yeah,
and it's obvious that they're copying other brands.
yeah, yeah. It is obvious that they're copying. And the prime example of that is own brand.
Mm,
Own brand is taking many of the features of a brand and providing them at a lower price. And there's a
mm,
market for that. There are people who will want that, but it's not the brand.
yeah.
And, and the way I like to think about it is that be inspired. Be inspired by these successful people. Be inspired by what they do well and be aware of what they might not be so good at. Because we all have strengths and we all have things that we're not that strong on. And that's another part of your personal brand, I think, playing to your strengths. Play to your strengths, build on your strengths. And I think also that brings in, if you do that well, then that brings in your ability to collaborate with others who help you where you're not so strong as well. So I think about it as inspiration. Modeling is another word for it. But I would say never really copy, because when you copy, you lose that sense of the who you are. It's so important. Who 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 are we bringing to this organization, and what makes us different, and what makes us distinctive, and what's the contribution and impact we're going to make.
Mm.
And it could
Yeah.
be that at some stage there's a misalignment or a disconnection, some form of dissonance, and then it's time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very powerful actually, because I think there has to be at some point you have to recognize
Yeah,
the alignment piece. I
yeah,
think connected to that, I mean, the other question I think I mentioned to you just before we hit record here today, I
yeah.
had a really interesting comment made to me recently, which was somebody, I mean, very kindly was complimenting me on the social posts that I share on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
And he said, but you do write them, don't you? It's not generated by AI, is it? And
yeah,
it was quite interesting to me, that question, because yes, I do write my own posts. That is very important to me. I do write my own content, but it was obviously a question that had crossed his mind. So,
yeah,
how do we maintain that sort of brand authenticity
yeah,
and yet still use and harness the power of AI? Like, what do you see are the sort of mistakes people are doing right now, and
yeah.
what are some of the good ways of approaching this?
Well, AI is a really useful tool, and there are different AI models that you can use. I can share what I've learned.
Yes, I'd love to know. Yeah, because I
I've
think
learned
it's a
a
very
couple of
individual
things.
learning process,
Yeah,
isn't
I've learned a
it?
couple of things. So I've learned that um, if I use it and I like a phrase that it's given me, I always quote it. So I say, quote, ChatGPT says, or Claude.ai says, and then use it. And that learning's come from, I put in a question and got, it was around branding, and I got something, I think it was ChatGPT, and I got, these are 7 points. And I thought, oh, they're really good. And then this is pure serendipity. I then put a similar question into good old Google, and what came up was a blog post written by someone with exactly those 7 points. And I thought, oh my God, that's why I thought I will only ever quote it. Because if I'd taken those 7 points as if and written a post or a blog or whatever, as if they were my thinking, that would have been plagiarism. I would have been stealing someone else's ideas and owning them. So what I say is, what's really definitely use AI for research, or a quick way to bring ideas together, but just never use it verbatim.
Mm.
Find a way, this is something that you'll help people with, find a way of developing your vocabulary, your take, your insights. And it feels really hard at first, but the more you do it, the more you'll grow your confidence, and the more that your voice, your tone will be recognized. So
Mm.
with big brands, you can think of examples like Carlsberg, probably the best lager in the world. Well, that tone is witty and understated and quite funny, and it's taken them a while to get to that. And that's the sort of thing that you're aiming at. What's my take? So here are the facts. What's my insight? What's my interpretation? So what are the sort of words I use? And it's not an overnight thing, it takes time and experimentation, and it evolves, and it will always evolve, always.
So would you suggest people really reflect on this? Like, think about what's your tone of voice? Like, how do you like to
Yeah,
express yourself and communicate? Are you more informal? Are you more
yeah,
expert? Is
yeah,
that the kind of thing that is as an exercise worth reflecting on, do you think, as a personal
yeah,
brand?
yeah, definitely, definitely. And of course, I'm speaking as someone who is ex-corporate world. So one of the things because it's different. Writing in the corporate world and speaking in the corporate world is a bit,
Mhm.
I think, can be different from the small business community. So one of the things that took a long time, I'd say I'm still not there, is some people have this wonderful gift of writing as they speak. Whereas I spent years and years and years in corporate marketing and corporate branding. And so when I wrote marketing plans, it's third person.
Mm.
It's with an element of detachment. It's a bit academic.
Mm.
And yet I suspect the corporate world's moved as well. So in a way that takes out the personality rather than putting the personality in. So you have that gap between this is how I write my reports and this is how I speak my presentation.
I think that's really fascinating. And actually,
Yeah,
I'm very conscious that when I left the corporate world and started up this business, so I started this business 9 years ago,
yeah,
I have almost had to adjust my tone of voice and adjust and
yeah,
find my way of expressing myself,
yeah,
which was different from the way I
yeah,
perhaps positioned myself and was communicating within corporate worlds. And I
yeah,
know that even on, so both of us are very active on LinkedIn. I've started doing regularly posting on LinkedIn, probably was 4 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And
yeah,
that took time to find my real
yeah,
true tone of voice
yeah,
and what works for how I express what I want to share with the world.
yeah.
Yeah, so isn't it that is
Yes.
also evolving, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. It does evolve. And I think
Mm,
there's another thing about personal brand which links to behavior and how you express yourself, which is about consistency. And consistency is one of the great rules of business branding. Be consistent with your fonts and your colors and your use of image and everything. The reason it really matters for personal branding is imagine working for someone and you have no idea how they're going to react. Imagine working for someone and they're really moody. It's a nightmare. So
yeah.
because your personal brand is about your reputation and your image and the impact you make. So this can, in a way, what you're saying to yourself is, this is the best version of me. And it's not going to be perfect. It's perfectly imperfect. It's the best version of me. And how can I be true to me in my behaviors so I'm not going, oh, up down?
Yeah.
Because that is really difficult for other people to manage emotionally.
I suppose ultimately that's how you build trust. That's how you
Yes.
create the trust
Yeah.
factor with others, right? Which is
Yeah.
true for
Yeah.
brands in
Yeah.
business as well.
Yeah.
There's one final area I suppose we haven't sort of touched so much on, which is we've talked about the positioning piece, we've talked about how to think of yourself as a brand, what elements go into that,
Yeah.
and authenticity within that. But
Yeah.
there's also the promotional piece as well. Now, I know your specialism is more around brand strategy,
Yeah.
developing brands,
Yeah.
but I'm curious, when we think about personal brands and promoting our personal brand,
Yeah.
sometimes I get, when I talk about this with people I work with, they're a bit like, how do I even do that beyond
Yeah.
doing my day job, beyond the things that I do
Yeah.
to deliver my performance? Do you have any
Yeah.
perspectives on that from a brand perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really values related.
Mm,
Um, and also it's values related. So you said it. So because you're a whole person, your personal brand is a whole. And of course we have many roles in life, but there's what I do in work and what I do out of work. So what do I do out of work that I can talk about in work? So it could be, I know you do volunteering, so it could be volunteering, it could be sport, it could be seeing unusual places, it could be something to do with history, or the arts. And I think that makes bringing in your interests and passions that relate to your values from outside work into work is really relevant. And then the other part of promoting yourself, is that you're not selling yourself. Because this comes up with small business owners. I hate selling myself. You're never selling yourself. What you're selling is your services or your products. Or if you're working in an organization, what you're selling or promoting is what I can do for this business. So part of promoting yourself is seeking out opportunities to help. And sometimes those opportunities, I remember, it's because I was interested. I must have offered myself to do you remember the milk round?
Oh, yes, indeed. So just, do you want to just explain what that is for people? Perhaps, I don't know if that's
Yeah,
true in
people
every
that,
country.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I must have offered myself to interview students at university.
Hmm.
So it was part of screening students who were interested in a marketing career. And the first part of that was going out to universities, doing presentations, and then interviewing students and saying yes, no, maybe. And the hardest were the maybes. So is
Yeah.
that maybe a yes, or is that maybe a no? But yeah, so I would say that's part of your personal brand, is based on your strengths, based on your values. What opportunities can you proactively seek out?
Mm,
What do you think?
absolutely. Yeah, I have to say I agree. And I think that's really interesting for me when I talk about building a personal brand. Actually, I think about it in two ways. I think there's within the organization.
Yeah,
So seeking out the opportunities to be
yeah,
seen as a leader, to be
yeah,
seen um, contributing and adding value in a way that aligns with your brand, your
yes,
personal brand.
yes,
But then there's also for me what happens outside the organization. And that's, I
yeah,
think, often the part that people miss, particularly when they want to go for the next level in their career.
yeah,
You've almost got to build up that thought leadership and that being seen as
yeah,
an expert in something
yeah,
outside organization.
yeah,
So I sometimes talk to people about, well, what are the opportunities to even share what you have opinions about on LinkedIn, or
yeah,
to talk about some of the work that you are able to talk about on LinkedIn,
yeah,
events you're attending.
yeah,
Um, how are you contributing? Maybe perhaps getting involved in industry bodies and organizations, channels. So that there are many different ways depending on the person I'm working with. But
yeah,
try to help people think about that sort of personal
yeah.
brand internally and then externally as well.
And how it's consistent.
Yes,
So,
exactly
so
this.
the threads that connect it are probably values and purpose,
Yes,
I would say.
absolutely, absolutely. And the external piece isn't just for people, who are job searching. For me, that's an important part of
Yeah,
career development and being seen and visible within your
yeah,
industry, within
yeah,
whatever you're aiming for as a vision, actually.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that's my perspective. But I absolutely agree. The internal promotion is really important as part of
yeah,
your personal brand.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
let me ask you, as we come towards the end of today's episode, I had so much sort of amazing kind of conversation here. I've really enjoyed this real perspective on brand strategy applying to our personal brand. There's one thing you want people to remember from today. What's the key sort of takeaway you want people to have around personal branding?
I really do think it's about being true to yourself, and it's being focused on, I'll say it again because I think it's a brilliant quote. It's this being focused on the impact you're going to make for bringing who you are to what you do and how you do it in a way that no one else can.
Fantastic. Well, Lynn, thank you so much for making it so clear, helping the listeners
Oh,
today also understand their brand, and I'm sure they'll really take some valuable nuggets from today. if people want to find out more about you, your work, understand more about branding and the work that you do, what is the best way for them to get in touch, or how should they kind of follow you and connect with you?
Um, the platform that I'm most active on is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, send me a direct message or comment on a post or whatever, LinkedIn. And there's also my website where I've written a few blogs around branding topics. So those are the best ways.
Amazing. Well, I know Lynne, I follow Lynne for a long time. So her LinkedIn posts are very thoughtful, very inspiring, and thought-provoking as well. So I do recommend that.
Oh,
We'll put all your links in the show notes as well, so everybody will have
brilliant.
those.
Yeah.
But Lynne, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated you joining me for this conversation. We've talked about doing this for a long time, so I'm
Yeah.
so happy that we did this today. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, and look forward to seeing everybody next time on cultural communication confidence.
Thank you so much for asking. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.